Today is actually Holocaust Remembrance Day, and as part of commemorations during this period, President Biden is set to address anti-Semitism at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum tomorrow. His remarks come amid a sharp spike in anti-Semitism following this crisis in the Middle East and following the president breaking his silence to speak about these campus protests last week. Well, joining us now on what we can expect from the president is NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, good morning. Always great to see you. So what should we expect? What can you tell us about the president's address tomorrow?
Well, this is a speech that we know the president has been working on for some time now. It will be delivered as a part of the National Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual Days of Remembrance, something that the museum has been hosting since the early 80s, I believe it is. And so President Biden will follow in the footsteps of other presidents in addressing a gathering at the U.S. Capitol actually tomorrow, and he will talk about obviously, the loss of so many lives, 6 million Jews all those years ago at the hands of the Nazis. He will lament that loss and talk about where that fits into the broader context of history and how we handle that reality today. He's also going to talk about what the White House has called a moral duty to address anti-Semitism in this country and around the world, for that matter. Obviously, we've been watching some of the protests that have been happening at college campuses around the country. We do expect that the president will address that as well, similar to the way he did last week. But I think the main thrust of what we're going to hear from him tomorrow, Savannah, is talking about the responsibility that every individual and every government entity has to combat anti-Semitism. And he'll also talk about the work that his administration has done since he announced his national strategy to counter anti-Semitism about a year ago, May of last year. And there have been several steps that the administration has taken since then, Savannah.
And Aaron, let's specifically talk about this chaos that we've seen on campus. What is the White House's ongoing message now regarding those demonstrations? And do you think we'll hear anything different, anything new about those particular events when the president makes his remarks?
I don't think we'll hear anything new necessarily. The president may address potentially any new initiatives that he may be trying to take. But I think the message that we'll hear from the president, as we heard last week, is that the administration, the president, supports the idea of demonstration, something that is a First Amendment right in this country. But he says, as he said last week, it is something that needs to be done peacefully. It's something that needs to be done at the right time and in the right place. And destroying property, breaking into buildings is not something he would support. I want you to hear just a portion of what the president had to say about this in the short remarks he gave on this issue last Thursday. Listen to this.
There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans.
And so, Savannah, the president has recognized that there are passions about this issue, about what's happening in Gaza across the board. When we've gone to formal speeches the president has given on other topics, when we've gone to campaign events, there have been people in the crowd who stood up and protested what the administration has supported in terms of Israel's actions in Gaza. But the administration says that is something it supports, the idea that people will speak their minds, but it doesn't want to see violence as a result of people making those thoughts known, Savannah.
And Aaron, you laid out what the president is doing concretely at the top of this conversation. And we also know the House of Representatives recently passed what's being called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to help enforce anti-discrimination laws. Are we expecting anything new, any future steps from the White House like that to address the rise in anti-Semitism?
So this law that's coming out of the House of Representatives that was passed last week would push the Department of Education to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that is in line with international organizations in terms of how it starts to enforce rules around these issues of discrimination and such. And so the Senate has said that it's looking at that piece of legislation that passed in the House. The White House has said that it in principle supports the idea. There may be some tweaks to the language before we hear a final position from the White House on this, but it is likely that it could get through the Senate and to the president's desk, and he would likely sign it. At the same time, we are anticipating hearing what the president has to say tomorrow, Savannah, and whether he will announce any new initiatives. The White House has made clear that when it comes to what we're seeing on college campuses, a lot of the decisions that are being made in terms of how to interact with protesters, how to stop protests, how to clear camps, those are decisions that are are for universities and colleges to make and local governments. But the president has said he will continue to speak out forcefully against violence as these demonstrations are happening, and obviously will continue to happen, certainly through the election, but until something more concrete happens in Gaza to help Palestinians there. All
right, Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.